Okay. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here and joining us this morning. I want to wish everyone a happy Hanukkah, and hopefully everyone has had a beautiful Shabbat and a beautiful weekend and is enjoying a beautiful Hanukkah filled with light and joy. So they tell a story, start with a little story, a little tale. There's a story about two friends, two very, very close friends that shared a bond and a passion about baseball. And they would talk every single day about baseball, their teams and memories and stories and so on and so forth. And they used to ask, and they wondered, they mused about whether or not there would be baseball in heaven at the end of life. So they made up that whoever would die first would come back and share with their friends whether or not there's baseball in heaven. So one fellow passes on, and he comes to his friend in a dream, and he tells his friend in the dream, I have good news and bad news. His friend says, what do you mean? He says, well, there is baseball in heaven, so that's the good news. We always wondered. The bad news is that tomorrow you're up to bat. So that's the bad news. So a lot of times when people think about Kabbalah, they think about mystical things like dreams and heaven. And of course, Kabbalah does speak about things of that nature, angels, heaven, dreams, and many other mystical aspects of reality. But Kabbalah is mostly concerned about day-to-day life, because Kabbalah's interest is in how to enlighten us to grow and to empower us and inspire us to grow and to develop ourselves, because that is the ultimate miracle. That is the ultimate mystical magic. When a human being changes and chooses to change and grows, that is the ultimate miracle of God. That is the ultimate miracle of our universe. And that's Kabbalah's main interest, is in providing that inspiration and knowledge to help us with that growth. Of course, now we are in the midst of the holiday of Hanukkah. Today is the third day of Hanukkah. Hanukkah is a holiday of lights. And there's an old expression that says that you should listen to the story that the candles tell. That if you listen carefully, you will hear that the candles are telling a story. I do want to make sure that you don't put your ears too close to the candles. You don't have to do that. But as you're sitting near the menorah, of course, you can just reflect on many of the messages that the lights share on so many different levels. And today, I'd like to share just some thoughts from Kabbalah and Hasidic philosophy on the meaning and significance and the messages of the lights. There is an expression, I shared it on one of my Hanukkah messages, that comes from Proverbs that says, that the candle of God is the soul of man. In other words, that each of us that have souls, each of us as human beings are God's candles. That's what we are. That's what God puts us here for, that we are his candles. Again, the soul of man, the candle of God is the soul of man. That is the saying in Proverbs. What that means is that each of us is here to be a candle. A candle is, its function is to be a source of light. In other words, a candle that does not give light is nothing but a clump of wax. That's what it is. It's not a candle if it's not giving light. And if the Torah, if the Proverbs is saying that each human being is God's candle, that means by definition, our whole identity is one that we're here to give light, to bring light to the world in some way or another, that we are bringing hope, we're bringing joy, happiness, faith, inspiring people, educating, enlightening people, helping people in their hard times, whatever form that light may be. And it can take on many forms, but ultimately God says, you are here to be my candle. That is what you are here to do. You are here to be my candle. And every day we have to ask ourselves, what am I going to do today to be God's candle? Because if I don't do something today to be God's candle, then I have no purpose in being here, because God's whole entire purpose in being here, he says, is to be a candle, to be his candle. That is why we're here. So every single day we have to make sure that we are doing something in which we are being a candle in which we are giving light and bringing light to the world. And when we take this concept a little further, we come to the understanding that a candle's main purpose is to shine in places that it's dark. Lighting a candle in the midst of the day, of a bright sunny day, doesn't help much. It doesn't contribute much. When does a candle have the greatest impact is specifically when its surroundings are dark. That's when it has its greatest impact, which also tells us and reminds us that when life is a little bit challenging, when things are a little dark, that's not the time to say, well, I don't have the energy in a time like this to be a source of light. I've got so many of my own problems of feeling so sorry for myself that I can't be busy now helping other people. Now I'm going to do what instinctively human beings do when things get tough. I'm just going to kind of pull in towards myself, get into a survival mode. And we're told if your function is to be a candle, then your main purpose is specifically when it's dark. When it's dark, that's when the candle needs to be shining and illuminating things for other people. So number one, we need to be a candle. We need to be shining. Number two is a candle's main function, its main purpose is specifically when it's dark, specifically when things are dark and are difficult and challenging. That is specifically when we want to make sure that our candle is illuminating our surroundings for the people, excuse me, for the people around us. And that is very much connected to something we've been reading in the Torah, which is about Joseph. It's interesting that Joseph is the only biblical figure, if you read through the entire Bible, he is the only biblical figure given the accolades that he was a successful person. The Torah says he was Ish Matzliach, which means a successful person. He was just an epitome of success. He was Mr. Success. And the Torah says that was Joseph. There's not another biblical figure given that accolades, given that praise, given that title of a man of success, great success. Now, of course, when we think of Joseph, we say, well, of course, he was the man of success. He was the Jew that became probably the most important and most powerful person in the ancient world. He became the second in command of Egypt. He controlled, in a time of a worldwide famine in the civilized world of that time, of the what was the world of that time, he was the one who held the keys to all the sustenance and food. He was the most powerful person possibly in the world at the time. So of course we consider him a man of success. But what's interesting is that the Torah only gives that praise and that accolades to Joseph, not when he's the viceroy to the king of Egypt later in his life. It's specifically when he is a slave in Egypt, or later languishing in a dungeon jail. That is when the Torah calls him a successful person. Because the Torah is telling us the mark of a successful person is that even when the circumstances are very bleak, even when you are surrounded by a lot of darkness in your life, that you continue to be a candle, you continue to be a source of light for other people, and you are illuminating your environment. That is the epitome of success. You are succeeding in your mission here in this world. So again, if we are here to be a candle, it is specifically when things are dark, that is when our function and our purpose is most pronounced. That's not the time to extinguish the flame. That's the time to light the flame, because your purpose here is to illuminate darkness. So that's a second point. Another point on this concept of light and sharing light is the beauty of light and a flame is that it's different than many other substances. What do I mean by that? Many other substances, if I have a certain amount of a substance and I give some of it away to someone else, it's a zero-sum game. I have less of it now, you have more. And if I have more, then you have less. If I have a cup of water and I pour some water for you, my cup now has less water. But with a flame, if my candle ignites and gives fire and shares a fire with another candle, the original flame is no smaller and is no way diminished by the fact that it is now shared that light with a second candle, with another candle. And in fact, theoretically, you can have one candle that can light an infinite amount of candles, as long as it's still illuminated, it's still a light. It could continuously illuminate other candles, and its original light is not diminished in any way. And each one of those lights that have been kindled can now also kindle an infinite amount of other lights. That is the nature of inspiration. That is the nature of sharing knowledge, enlightenment. If I share knowledge with you, I don't have less knowledge now because I've shared it with you. If I inspire you, I don't have less inspiration because I've inspired you. So it is not a zero-sum game whereby if I give and I share light, I'm going to have any less of it. That's the beauty of it, is that I can continuously, infinitely share light in any form that it is, and it is in no way diminishing from the light that I have. Now to really, after these just a few lighter ideas, sorry for the pun, we're going to just go a little deeper. And this is going to take, we're going to have two steps in this process. Number one is that in order for a flame to remain a flame, it needs fuel. If it doesn't have fuel, then it quickly extinguishes, it quickly goes out. So let's think about a oil lamp, because we're talking about Hanukkah. We could do this to talk about a wax or many other things that can be fuel to a flame. But let's think about oil. And oil is a fuel for the light. And what the oil represents is something that is allowing itself to be consumed in the flame. The oil is pulled into the wick and is burnt up. The oil is being burnt up by the flame, and it's losing itself in the flame. In other words, as we've mentioned before, the oil represents a selfless devotion. That's what the oil represents. The willingness to be lost in something beyond yourself. The oil is going to be burned up. It's going to be consumed. That is what produces light. What produces light is that selfless devotion whereby the oil is allowing itself to be burnt up and consumed in the flame. That is what continuously fuels the flame. So in Kabbalah, it explains that the flame represents passion, inspiration, love, feelings. That is what the flame represents, that passion, that inspiration. And everyone is looking for passion in life. Everyone is looking for inspiration in life. That's what keeps us going. We need inspiration. We need light. We need passion in our lives. The question is, how do we get that passion? How do we achieve it? And Kabbalah says the way to achieve it is to do selfless acts. What does it mean, selfless acts? Selfless acts means that specifically acts that are done when I'm not really inspired. I'm not passionate. I'm not feeling anything. And I do the right thing because it's the right thing. It's not about what I want to do, what I feel good doing. It's the right thing to do. That is the selfless act that becomes the fuel for the light. So in other words, as we've mentioned before, this is counterintuitive because most people conventionally say, I will do once I'm inspired. When I'm inspired, then I'll do things. I need to be inspired. You got to inspire me. When I'm inspired, then I'll do things. Kabbalah turns that on its head and says, no, do things, and then you'll get inspired. You start without the inspiration, because when you do things when you're inspired, in many ways, you're fulfilling your wants. I like this. I want to do this. I love this. I'm passionate about this. We're saying no. Before you're passionate, before you want, before you like doing it, you don't really want to do it. You don't really feel good about doing it, but you're going to do it because you know it's the right thing to do, because God wants you to do it. It's the right thing to do. That is an act of selflessness. That act of selflessness is a fuel in the sense that it is a selfless devotion that's got nothing to do with I. It's losing itself in something beyond itself. That is the fuel that fuels the light, the passion, the love. So in other words, it is a counterintuitive, and it works the other way around that most people conventionally look at it. A lot of people say, I'm going to work on getting inspired. Once I get inspired, then I'll start doing things. Kabbalah says, no, do things when you're not inspired. not because you're inspired, but because it's the right thing to do. And that those actions will begin to inspire and fuel the flame. Now, I want to explain that the way that those actions fuel the flame is in some way very much like the way the oil fuels the flame. What do I mean by that? The relationship between the oil and the flame is not a direct relationship. What do I mean? If I take oil and pour it directly on a flame, what will happen to the flame? Flame's going to go out. If I pour the oil directly on the flame, it's just going to extinguish it. But if the oil is used by the wick and it gets sucked into the wick, the flame sucks it into the wick, then indirectly it becomes a fuel to the oil. So the relationship is an indirect one. It's not a direct one. And what this correlates to is that when I do selfless acts, I don't really see how is that going to make me feel anything. I don't feel any passion now. You're telling me do this, do that. I don't really want to, but you're telling me it's the right thing to do. And somehow this is going to make me have feelings. The relationship between those acts and the feelings is an indirect relationship, very much like the relationship between the oil and the flame. It's not a direct relationship, it's an indirect relationship. And I'm going to expound on this a little bit more. In other words, this is a situation where the passion, you don't find the passion finds you. There's certain things in life where you can go ahead and directly pursue something, and there's a direct correlation. 1 + 1 = 2. If I do this and I do that, this will bring me to there. I see how that works. There's a direct correlation, right? If I pick up the cup and I drink the water, I'll no longer be thirsty. That makes sense. There's a correlation here. If I do this, I do that, it results in this. Some things, it's not that I can pursue it. I have to do what I have to do. And then at some point in time, the result will find me. And it works like this with happiness, for example. Happiness is not something you can pursue. In fact, sometimes when you make life about pursuing happiness, that's a recipe for misery. If your whole focus is, I need to be happy, I want to be happy, and my whole life is about how do I be happy, you'll tend to find yourself in a lot of therapy trying to find that very elusive happiness. Whereas if you say, no, my life is about doing the right thing. I want to do the right thing. I want to serve. I want to do the right thing. Happy or not, happiness will find you. That is the way it works with some things. And we don't see the direct correlation, but it's something that results afterwards. It's not direct, it is indirect. So again, first thing to understand is that the oil, when we look at those candles, and again, I said Hanukkah candles, we look at those candles and we're supposed to listen and think and meditate on the messages. One of the messages is that in order to give fuel to the flame, you need oil, you need the fuel. That fuel represents something that gets consumed in the fire, which represents selflessness. What is selflessness? Is when I do things not because I'm inspired. Because when you're doing it, when you're inspired, you're doing it because you want to do it. We're talking about where you're not inspired, so you don't want to do it, but you do it anyways because you're selfless in the sense of it's the right thing to do. That selflessness, which is the oil that gets lost in the flame, that's what fuels the flame, but again, in an indirect way. You don't necessarily, that's why people have a hard time with this, because they say, well, if I'm not feeling inspired, how is my doing things when I'm uninspired going to magically make me inspired? I'm just not inspired. How's that going to make me inspired? But it does work that way, that there's this indirect correlation. When you do the right thing, inspiration will find you. It will come. So really, if we delve into this a little deeper, we find that actually in lighting a candle, there are 2 steps. Step number 1, you strike a match and you ignite the wick, right? So if you have a wick with oil, you just stand there, nothing's going to happen. What do you need to do? You need to strike a match and ignite the wick. That's step number 1. But if there's no oil, what happens to that wick? Within a few seconds, the wick expires, it burns up and there's nothing left. So step number 2 is that after you've ignited the flame, the oil starts to be sucked in later, and a few moments later, what's fueling that flame? Not your ignition, but the oil flame is fueling it. So in fact, it turns out that there are 2 lights. There's the light you create directly, and then there's the light that's being, a few moments later, that's being created and fueled by the oil. Okay, so there's really when you light a candle, when you light any candle, there are really those two steps. Your initial ignition, your initial striking of the match and lighting the candle. And for a moment or two, that's the light you've created directly. And then a few moments later, the oil begins to take over, fueling that flame, because if not, the flame goes out. So in Kabbalah, it says that this represents a two-step process, 2 steps in creating passion, in creating love, in creating feelings, the emotions that fuel us, that the emotions that we are looking for. We want to feel inspired. We want to feel passionate. But there's 2 steps. One is a direct one where we directly, and you see the direct correlation. You strike a match, there's a flame on your match, you light the candle, you can see the direct correlation there. That, says the Kabbalah, represents meditation that you work on, that you think about things that will arouse emotion. When, for example, when you think about how much of a difference you're making in someone else's life, think about that, reflect on. There are people that you are able to inspire them, you're able to touch their lives. You see you can make a difference in their lives. That is a direct meditation. You think about those things, and that results in certain feelings. And that's very clear. You can see the direct correlation. My thoughts are thoughts that are worthy of inspiring certain feelings. You can think about the awesomeness of God. You can think about the miracles we witness every day. You can think about so many things that you can reflect on and meditate on. Those thoughts can inspire feelings. Let's talk about in the context of a relationship, right? You can, I always tell people, if you would spend 3 minutes a day meditating on the positive virtues of your spouse or of a friend or a relative, whatever it may be, if you spend 3 minutes a day thinking about all their positive virtues, right? I know some people say, they don't have any positive virtues. And everyone has some positive virtues. So you meditate on their positive virtues. After 3 minutes of thinking, contemplating, and meditating on their positive virtues, you're going to feel positive feelings towards that person. There's a direct correlation. That is the work that we do directly to arouse emotions, to create passion. That's the striking of the match. The second part is the acts of service. When we do actions, not out of necessarily inspiration, uninspired acts, we just do the right thing and we keep doing the right thing. We will develop a passion, a feeling, a sense of connection to that thing that kind of happens by osmosis. It happens somehow, it just happens. In other words, like this, let's go back to a relationship. If you're in a relationship and you're doing acts of service for your loved one on a daily basis, not always because you're feeling tremendous love, just because it's the right thing to do. So you're doing those acts of service and you're being kind, you're being thoughtful, you're going out of your way, you're calling them in the middle of the day, seeing how they're doing, you're sending them a nice note, you're doing something out of the ordinary. You're just doing those acts, not forget about how they make the other person feel. That's a different item. They will, in time, by osmosis, in a seemingly indirect way, this passion will come to you. You will feel a passion towards it. It's something that I can't explain to you how. It's almost, you got to do it and then you'll see. It's very much like, this is the parts of Judaism, spirituality, where God, in Tehillim, it says, taste it and you will see. I can't, when you're telling a child, eat this food, it's good, and the child said, yuck, I don't want to eat it. Eventually what you do is you tell the child, listen, I can't sit here and explain to you that it's good. The only way you're going to know it's good is taste it. You got to taste it for yourself. There are some things you've got to taste it, then you'll know. So, for example, someone who observes mitzvot, puts on the tefillin or many other things, and can try to describe to you how it makes you feel after a while, the feelings that you have. You can't really explain it to someone who doesn't do it. Eventually, you have to tell someone, you know what? Do it. Do the mitzvah. Do Shabbat. Do the different things. When you do it, you'll begin to see how it makes you feel. I can't describe and mentally convince you that this is what's going to happen. You have to experience it for yourself. It's the indirect. It's like the thing that comes kind of almost magically. It finds you. You do the right thing, do the right thing, do the right thing. The passion will come to you. It's that indirect connection. So again, in creating a flame, in creating a fire, there's a 2-step process. The one is you strike the match, you light it. That's the step one. You're making a direct, there's a direct process, logical process to create fire. That's meditation. Think about things that will inspire you. You could think about how you're impacting other people's lives. You could think about the needs. You could think about, wow, there's people out there that have real needs. They're really suffering. That might inspire you to get out there and do something about it. You can meditate on the positive virtues of a loved one. Whatever it is, these things that will inspire directly. Step number two is the acts of service that are the oil, which are selfless acts of service done not because you're inspired, done because of a sense of a commitment that in time, almost in a magical way, but in time will bring the feeling. The feeling will come. You don't always see it day one. It doesn't always just happen. It's not like you do the act and then you see the result. It's kind of indirect and it takes time, but by doing it, you become passionate. It grows on you. It's something happens, something you're overtaken by it. And again, these are the two steps of love. It's very interesting, therefore, that love, in a certain way, love, which is a symbol for all passion and emotion, is something that has two steps. There are two flames, so to speak, two lights. The light you light and the light that gets fueled by the oil, the two lights. And it's very interesting. If you look in the Torah says, commands us, and you shall love God, right? We read it in the Shema. It says, and you shall love God. Ve'ahavta. In Hebrew, it's one word. And you shall love. One word. Ve'ahavta. In English, it translates, and you shall love. That is the commandment where Torah says you need to work on having passion. How do you get passion? How do you get love? How do you do that? Well, there's two lights. There's the light you create, the light that's created fueled by the oil. The two lights. So interesting to note that Kabbalah points something very interesting out. Let me just share something here. Okay, you should be able to see this on your screen. I have written there in Hebrew the word ve'ahavta, and you shall love. If you count up the numbers, the numerical value, this is just a cute little thing from Kabbalah, if you want to call it cute, but deeply powerful. Ve'ahavta is equal to 414. It's 400 plus 2 plus 5 plus 1 plus 6 is 414. Light, what is the numerical value of light, is 200 plus 6 plus 1, which is 207. And we said, how many lights are there in love? Two lights. So what is 2 times 207? 2 times 207 is 414. In other words, and you shall love is made of two lights. The light that you ignite, the light that comes from the oil. That's why everything in Kabbalah, it shows us that the words all have meaning and significance, even the numerical value of the words. The fact that, and you shall love, the commandment in the Torah about having passion is 414 is not by coincidence. It's because it is made of two lights, each one of them 207, because light is 207, and therefore the 207 plus 207 is the 414. And that is the two different lights, two different flames that are required. We'll take a moment for questions or if people want to clarify something here.
Rabbi?
Yes.
When you're performing the mitzvah,
yeah,
or making a positive impact in someone's life, but you're planning it, you're planning to do a mitzvah.
Yeah.
It's part of your objective, your goal to do more mitzvahs to help more people.
Yeah.
Are we saying that's not as selfless because it's inspired and that God doesn't celebrate that as much as if you were just doing it spontaneously?
No. So I would say like this. It's not a matter of spontaneous or not spontaneous. You can plan. The plan is not the problem. The question is really about whether or not you're doing it because you're inspired to do so or because you're doing it because it's the right thing to do. There's no question that when we can be inspired, of course, we want to be inspired. There's nothing like an act that's done with inspiration. That is wonderful. But not always are we inspired. Inspiration is sometimes very hard. It's a very, very expensive commodity, so to speak. It's a very hard thing to come by. Not every day, I don't know about you, but not every day do we wake up and feel like, wow, I'm just so inspired to go out there and do good things. Sometimes we wake up and we're kind of like, just not in that mood, but we do it anyways. We do it we do it then because it's the right thing to do. I always give the example, when my babies wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning and they need a diaper change and a bottle of milk and this and that. I don't necessarily do that out of a sense of love and passion, singing and saying, I'm so happy you woke me up at 3 o'clock in the morning. I'm just so passionate about this. I do it because it's the right thing to do. That child needs me. It's my baby. It's my responsibility. It's done out of a sense of commitment. It's a selfless act of, it's the right thing to do. You need to do this. You're being dependent on. Not every time do I take that, when I take out the garbage in the house, do I do it singing and saying, this is my favorite, most passionate, loving thing to do. I can't wait to take out the garbage every day. It's not the way I do it. I do it because it's my job. It's my responsibility. It's an act of service. It's what I do. This is my home. This is my family. It's what I can do for my family as a small example. So again, there are a lot of things we do where we just can't get passionate, or it's hard or not always are we passionate about it. But that act of service is what fuels the inspiration. So I would say, if you can be inspired, fantastic, and if not, also fantastic, because either way, it's a blessing. I will say that God's main concern is results, and results means that the act gets done, inspire or uninspired. As we always say, when you give bread to a starving man, right, a homeless guy, and you give him bread to eat, and he's starving, that bread does not taste any different to him, whether or not you were inspired to do it or uninspired. The bread tastes like bread, and what counts is that he's got bread to eat. That's what's most important. If we can get inspired to do it, fantastic. If we're not, that's also okay. Okay.
So
go ahead.
So if I'm inspired in the morning when I get up, that I'm looking for opportunities to help someone. Especially someone who's ill that I'm trying to comfort, or to do a good deed or volunteer to an elderly person.
That is ideal. The answer is yes. If we can be inspired, we always want to be inspired, because an act that's inspired is always going to be a better one. It's going to be more passionate, right? You're going to say, is it better in marriage to do things in a relationship, do things when you're inspired and passionate? Of course, we always want that, but not always can we. And we have to know that when we can, those acts are going to help fuel the passion. They're going to bring the passion. So I'm not saying if you're feeling passion, great. If you're feeling inspired, fantastic. That's the goal. The goal is to get the fire. We want to get the fire. We want to get the inspiration. But sometimes it's just not there. And we're trying to figure out, how do I get it? How do I get inspired? Well, like we said, it's a two-step process. There's the meditation, which is think, reflect on why what you're doing is so important, the difference you're making, how much those people need you. I'm using your example. Those meditations will more directly, hopefully, inspire. And then there's the indirect, which is sometimes just go out and do it, even if you're not inspired. Just do it. Do the actions. Do the right thing because it's the right thing. And that will, in an indirect way, by osmosis, begin to create passion. In Judaism, we have a lot of rituals. And a lot of these rituals, not always are we so inspired to do them. We just kind of do them. We just kind of go through the motions, feels. And you could look at that as just empty acts that are meaningless. But on the other hand, those acts of service, day in and day out, they begin to, by osmosis, make you feel inspired. They give that sense of, they indirectly create passion and inspiration where, like I said, the inspiration finds you. You don't find it. It kind of finds you after you've done the right thing. So that is the significance of the candle. Again, when you look at that flame and you understand the process, the mechanics that go into a flame, you have to strike a match and light it, and then the fuel has to take over and continuously fuel it. Kabbalah says there's significance and meaning to that. Everything, if we call the soul of man a candle, it's because there's a lot of correlations here. There's a lot of significance, and we can learn and understand certain things about life and about passion from a candle. Any other questions?
Just real quick. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Bruce.
Okay, Marge. I just wanted to share one instance and see if this makes sense.
Okay.
How a difference from being planned or being spontaneous. I have in the last month, I have a back injury. It's been bothering me, and I went to have an MRI done on my back. And I was praying that it would turn out well. I was having positive thoughts. And I came up to the building where I was having the MRI. And at that very moment in time, there was a gentleman in a wheelchair. His caretaker was going to push him into the van that he was going to leave in. And I thought to myself, he's not asking for help, but I could see he could use assistance. So for a brief moment, I thought, I'm here to see how my back is. And if I push this pretty big man up this ramp, it might hurt my back. But all of a sudden, it just diminished that thought. And I thought, this is the right thing to do. And I did it. And he was so appreciative. And I felt good. And then I said to myself, God created in my mind that particular instance for him to be there at that very moment that I was walking into the building, and that there was no way that I was going to hurt myself because he was in my presence.
Right.
Is that?
I think that's a great, beautiful, very inspirational story. And it's not so much about whether it's spontaneous or planned. Spontaneous it can be passionate, and sometimes planned can be passionate. I think whenever we have things that come to us, we should try to seize the moments. Sometimes they're planned, sometimes they're spontaneous. Spontaneous sometimes is a big test. God is kind of putting us in a position of a test where we're like kind of something's thrown our way. But really today we're focused more on whether, the significance and the power of those actions that we do that are not necessarily passionate. We're not necessarily inspired to do that, but that ends up being a fuel to give us inspiration. Marge, I think you had a question.
Yes, I think right now there's so many things that we can do that don't take a lot of effort that would be very inspirational. There's a lot of people in isolation. I have an uncle who is 94. He's my father's youngest brother, the only one living. And I hadn't talked to him for a few months. And I was reading last night and I thought, I'm just sitting here doing nothing. I wonder how my uncle is doing. And I gave him a call. And it really was a mitzvah because he lives alone. Sure. He lost his wife last year, and we had a lovely conversation. He's very intellectually competent.
There is no shortage of things we can do, and I would say that if anyone's wondering what they can do to help, call me. I'll give you a list.
Yeah, there's a lot of people
lots
out
of things
there.
We can do. Lots of things we can do to help people all over the world. Let me share the sheet. We'll go over that, the review sheet, and then we'll
Rabbi,
take any additional questions. Yes, go ahead.
Just a quick comment. It's not really a question.
Yeah.
Of course, everybody's watching the news and the pandemic, it's raging and whatnot. There's a gentleman by the name of Joseph Aron. He's a physician.
Yeah.
Around this hospital. And he was saying that he would much rather retire. He's at the age. He says there's no way he can do it. There are so many people that are depending on people like himself. Right. He says, you know what would everybody do, all the patients, if all of us are going to just take off our PI and just, move on and say, that's not to my benefit.
There are a lot of amazing heroes out there.
Unbelievable.
Kabbalah Cafe, lesson 313, the soul of man is the candle of God. On Hanukkah, we are to listen to the messages of the candles. A candle is defined by its giving light. So too, man's purpose is to be God's candle. After every day, you got to think, what did I do today to be God's candle? The need for a candle is when it's dark, like Joseph was called successful, specifically in the darkest moments of his life. That's the irony. He's not called successful when things are going well. His success is when things are not so easy. Light is not a zero-sum reality. Sharing your light does not diminish your light. And we also said the flame represents passion, love, and inspiration. The flame needs fuel. The fuel is what allows itself to be consumed in the fire. This represents selfless acts of service that lack passion. Because again, the fact that it lacks passion is why it's selfless. I'm doing it not because I want to do it. I'm doing it because it's the right thing to do. There are two steps in making a flame: the initial ignition and then the consuming of the fuel. Creating love and deep feelings requires our direct ignition, followed by the indirect fueling of the flame. This represents the love created by meditation, followed by a deeper love from our selfless acts of service. The latter love is not a love we can find, rather it finds us. So again, it's a two-step process. As we said, there are two lights in love: the light that we create, the light that we find, and the light that finds us through the acts of service that we do. Okay, I'll leave that up for another moment if anyone needs to get a picture of that. And we'll take any other questions, if anyone has any other questions. Okay, want to thank everyone for joining. And happy Hanukkah to everyone. Lots of joy. And remember, every day, each of us can be a candle in someone else's life. We can bring light in any small way, any way we can bring light to other people. Thank you so much for joining.
Thank you.
Happy Hanukkah.